And so, then it's like you get to your second year and your third years, typically that's when then you're going to be doing less class and more lab work, and then you're doing more so on your own or
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Food Grads Podcast with me, Veronica Hislop. And we have a fantastic guest for you today. We are speaking with AJ Taylor, a scientist at McCormick FONA. They are a flavor company that develops and manufactures flavors in a variety of categories. McCormick actually puts out once a year a flavor forecast report, which is this comprehensive report that looks at upcoming flavor trends. But today we're going to be focusing on AJ and his experience as a graduate student. AJ graduated with a Ph.D. in food science from the University of Illinois Urbana Champaign, where his research focused on understanding the physiochemical and microbiological aspects of cacao bean fermentation, I should say. And as someone who's doing a PhD, I know that this is not an easy feat. So today we're going to talk about the process of getting into graduate school, what it's like actually being in graduate school, and that journey outwards of leaving the grad school life and getting a full-time job. AJ is an open book, and that makes it really easy to talk to him about his grad school experience, making it the perfect episode to listen to if you're thinking about grad school. Let's get into this interview with AJ.
So my name is AJ Taylor. I'm 29 years old. I live in Illinois in and of itself. I just started with McCormick and Company at the FONA location, which was they just bought FONA about 3 or 4 years ago overall, but I work in the flavor solutions area. And so my title is Scientist to Innovation is what it's called. So yeah.
Wow, you're already at number two and you just got started.
I know it's great. It was super funny story in this, but I originally had applied for principal scientist because I don't know if same with you. Like when I was applying for things, I had no idea what titles honestly kind of meant, if that makes sense. Like here you're a senior scientist, but here you're a scientist for, but here you're an associate. Like
Yeah.
it was weird. And so I saw principal scientist and I was like reading through and I was like, yeah, no, it's a little bit out of my experience range, but I really liked the position and the idea behind it. And so I was just like, hey, I might as well try it out. And luckily that was the one that gave me an interview and gave me a job. So I was happy with that.
Perfect. Well, we'll go into that a little bit later.
Yes,
We'll start
definitely.
with more of the graduate, just to set the groundwork for everyone,
Yeah.
because you did PhD, you did a lot of chocolate research.
Yes.
So I know a little bit about it from the fat crystallization side, but I think you're in another realm of the chocolate. So let's talk graduate school. Let's talk what you did and talk about where you went and how that went for you.
Sure. So I went to the University of Illinois at Urbana Champaign. Originally, it was for a master's. We were working on phylogenetic clades for Listeria monocytogenes and biochemical research that I no longer honestly want to think about in the kindest way possible. But we got to a point where the professor I was working with was a new professor. And so we were not able to acquire funding to transition that master's into a PhD. And also, he needed to graduate people because it counts towards his like tenure and everything else matter, if that makes sense. And so there was just no particular way with that professor to continue on from a master's into a PhD. So I graduated with my master's and then went into a PhD with a different advisor, but still at the same university. And that was with Dr. Nikki Angaseth, who's the department head for the food science human nutrition department down there. And we basically originally, because of my microbiology background, wanted to look at fermentation aspects of Theobroma cacao, because for those that are just not aware, cacao is actually a fermented product. And so you have these cacao pods, they'll be opened up. There's basically these cacao beans inside of them, and then surrounding them is this like white pulp. And that white pulp is a very sugary, sweet, sticky substance that can easily be fermented because there's just a huge amount of sugar content in there. And obviously, yeast and bacteria happen to love that, right? And so the yeast come along and they'll ferment the sugars into alcohol and carbohydrate, carbon dioxide and water and all that other stuff and start making volatile organic compounds. And then you'll get lactic acid bacteria and acetic acid bacteria. And so we wanted to build out this concept of, could you be able to relate the bacteria, or there's not just the bacteria, but the microbes inside of the cacao that were fermenting this, and they're all spontaneous cacao fermentations. They're not starter cultures typically for the cacao industry. Could you relate those microbes to different flavors or different particular flavors or volatile organic compounds that could be produced later on. So could you take the same cacao and then ferment it with, this type of bacteria and this type of yeast, and this one with this type of yeast and this type of bacteria, and could you get two different flavors, even though it's the same cacao, same location, same area, same climate, you know what I mean? Like basically everything else being the same, but the only thing was the microbes being the difference. And we really built out this project. I spent about a year crafting it out. We were sending, trying to figure out collaborations and where we wanted to host it, who would be able to work, with us, because we needed to make sure that cacao was not going to be used to go to commercial, for example. We needed to design wooden boxes. It was a whole thing, right? Like we had to sit down and craft out every single little bit of this. And we go to Ecuador in January of 2020 for a study abroad that we were leading, myself and my advisor. And we went there for about, I think it was like 14 days or so. We went around, talked with some collaborators at the same time while also leading the study abroad. And we got, a bunch of yeses, be super happy, would love to work on that, yada, yada. We work with the university down there. We come back, we start applying for grants and funding. We're able to acquire like $12,000 in funding to come back at a summer and spend like a couple months basically in Ecuador. And then March 2020 happens and everything shuts down, right? And it was this very unfortunate, just like I'm assuming with every other PhD and or graduate student that was in COVID, that was like, well, what do I do? And especially for my project, not to go too much on the fiddle, but basically like ours was all international based. Everything that we had to do had to be done in country. There was no particular way that we could be able to acquire cacao pods and ferment them in the lab. We tried, you have to apply for a permit. The permit takes a couple months basically to be able to get. You go through the permit, then you can, now you have to buy the cacao pods. Well, at the same time, there was a chocolate shortage because COVID was happening at the exact same time. So there was no extra quote unquote cacao pods to be able to be purchased in the first place. We would try to work with universities down there to say, hey, could you be able to even get like 10 just so that we can try a trial run or something like that. They were able to acquire said 10. They shipped it out to us. It took 10 days. We opened up the box and they're all rotting inside. And we're
Oh my
like,
gosh.
that's super cool. And it was a very harrowing and I would honestly will say depressing experience, because it was just, I would meet with my advisor, we would go over some things, it would take about 10-15 minutes, I'd log off for the day, and I couldn't really continue or push forward more, right? And it was just because, my project wasn't based off of doing something in the lab. It was like I needed to be in farms, I needed to be working with farmers, we needed to do these
Hmm.
things. And so it was really difficult to do that. So we got to, I think, my third year of my PhD. It's about a year and a half overall, like later. And we were like starting off, and I had no data, no papers, nothing, kind of like working. I had a systematic review and meta-analysis I was working on, but other than that I really didn't have anything else. And I went to my advisor and I was like, I'm gonna be honest, we've got to move on, or I've got to leave grad school, because it was getting to a point where it was just no longer sustainable for myself and for, my family situation itself. It was getting to like, this is getting kind of in a bad area. So we finally just decided, okay, that August, we're going to spend from August to December, we're going to completely revamp the entire project. We're going to come up with a brand new project and come up with a brand new idea, and we're just going to start doing something. And it doesn't matter necessarily what we're doing. We're just going to just start and get something. And maybe from there, the train will, leave the station basically, and something will happen, and something like that. So we started working on a project of brewing cacao tea, or brewing Theobroma cacao as a tea, and seeing the physical chemical parameters behind that. So pH, titratable acidity, total phenolics, antioxidants, whole bunch of different chemical things that we were basically measuring for different brewing methodologies of cacao. So we would hot brew, cold brew, with shells, without shells, different roasting parameters that we would try to see if that influenced the resulting tea itself. And then we would run nothing published basically, but internal sensory, standard. Okay, we like this one. This one's not so good.
Mhm.
This one tastes different than this one, tastes lighter or whatever.
Yeah.
But we would just do that. And then as we were thinking about this, we got to like December. I was like, if this is just a tea, if I take a bunch of microbes called a SCOBY and throw it in there with some sugar, could I make it into a kombucha basically? And that was pretty much the second project that we worked on was, we basically finally came up with a good methodology for brewing the Roma cacao, and then we turned it into a kombucha by, putting a SCOBY in there and then looking at how that affected in different quantities of the SCOBY, the different amounts of the sugar, different amounts of what we call the mother liquid, which is the housing unit for where the SCOBY is being held. There's like this liquid that's like a vinegar in there. And so you would typically add like 10 to 15 milliliters of that into a normal kombucha brewing process to get it ready for the SCOBY. So we tried different levels of the mother liquid to see could that be, also influencing it as well. And then we tried different amounts of cacao, 5 grams, 10 grams, 20 grams, 50 grams, and seeing how does that affect the various physical chemical properties afterwards. And then that led into the third project, which was I wanted to get into e-sensing and using NIR and hyperspectral imaging basically to develop qualities of cacao, or to develop predictive models for qualities of cacao, I should say. And we were able to finally go back into Ecuador because COVID kind of, lifted in restrictions and everything. And so January 2022, we went back to Ecuador for the second time for our study abroad. And then I basically stayed there for like a month and a half later than everybody else. So we would, fly in, everybody else left, I would stay. And then we went to different cities in Ecuador to collect cacao samples to bring them back. And then we had the cultivars, we knew where they were from, we knew what type of cacao that they were, we knew the roasting parameters, we knew basically everything that we could possible about it. And then we brought it home and then looked at it under using NIR as the main way, and then did a bunch of physical chemical properties, fat, protein, moisture, fermentation, quality, like all sorts of like 11 different parameters that were a pain in the booty. And then did multivariate statistics and, multivariate statistics stuff. So that was fun. So
Wow.
yeah, it was a blast. It was fun. I'm so glad and happy that it is over with, honestly. It was 8 years of grad school in total. So, it was
I
very,
I understand.
yeah.
I understand, but it's amazing hearing. I honestly, when I asked you
Of
about your
course.
research, I was expecting, here's my 3 projects, here's what I did, I got in, I got out. Like that's,
Yep.
I know that's not typical, but at the same time,
Right.
that's what you kind of expect when you hear someone's answer.
Yeah.
But hearing how your first project didn't really pan out from COVID and then all that reminded me of my own research because I had
Right.
to scrap my whole first project because it was not reproducible. And I
Yeah.
just like, I can't handle this. But that's amazing that you were, when you started with this project originally pre-COVID, did you know that you were going to be traveling? Like, was that something you had
Oh
planned to
yeah.
do when you did to grad school?
Yeah, so what the idea was is we wanted to go to these farms and then for about a month at a time. So there was different projects that we had for that. So one of them is we wanted to look and see how does the microbial community change over time at one particular place in one particular area over time. So could we go like January, I think it was like September and then January again, and we would basically look at the microbes and sequence the microbes in one set of wooden boxes that were being fermented of cacao. Because when they're using these wooden boxes, they're using them over and over and over and over and over again. So we wanted to say, hey, if you start with a clean, brand new box and you ferment cacao and you do it in 6 months, you do it 12 months, you do it in 18 months, what is the longitudinal way that the microbes change over time, if they do change over time, versus something that's like it's been there for years and years and years and they just use the same ones over and over and over again, right? Another one was, like I said before, we wanted to try to use specific microbes to say, okay, if we do yeast A with lactic acid bacteria A with acetic acid bacteria A, and then yeast B, LAB B, acetic acid B, and then C, and then could we do AAB, AAC, BA, you know what I mean? It's just like just doing a right. And so it would be a lot of fun because it was going to be different fermentations and different aspects behind it. And then we would take it and we would make it all into chocolate. We would roast them all the same way, dry them out the same way, mill it the same way, ferment it, or sorry, temper it the same way. Basically everything else, as much as we possibly could, would be the exact same thing, except that it would just be the microbes would be different. And that was the coolest thing behind it because nobody, well, not I shouldn't say nobody. It's very difficult to link microbes to flavor changes in chocolate because you go through fermentation, drying, roasting, conching, milling, if you add anything in, sugar content, different amounts of it, vanilla, the caramel, like different flavors basically into tempering. It's like there's 8 other steps that you have to go through to try to see there's a chocolate difference change, right? In quality and everything. And so we built out this really cool system that I thought was so cool of you could truly answer the question of does the different types of fermentation here affect here? Or could you take something that is basically a lower quality cacao, but ferment it with specific microbes to make it taste as though it is a higher quality cacao, basically, or vice versa. So yeah, it was a lot of fun, a lot of traveling, but again, it didn't pan out, and we just got to a point that was like, it is what it is, and we had to move on from there.
Yeah. With for, for a lot of people who are going into grad school, I know, or thinking about grad school, I should say, it's a lot of confusion about how the process actually happens because you just told me about this set of experiments that you created. Was this when you're applying to grad school, you spoke to an advisor and you had the project set for you, or was it something that you came up with after you got into grad school? Because I think that can be confusing for a lot of people. It's like, well, what do I do when I get signed up? Like what's my project? How do we even start it? So how was that process for you?
Yeah, so I mean, being at UIUC, I've seen for like 8 years overall, I've seen a lot of different grad students that have kind of come through. And the biggest thing I could say is it is extremely dependent on your advisor. Some advisors are very much hands-on. They will be with you in the lab. They will walk you through different things. They will make sure that you're doing X, Y, or Z thing, right? Some advisors are much more hands-off where they'll say, if you come up to them and say, yeah, I think we should do the antioxidant, they'll be like, cool. What's the methodology you're using? And you'll be like, I don't know. And they're like, cool, go to the literature, find out, try some different methodologies and see what you need to do. Like, and basically, it's much more on you. And every single person is a little bit different. Like when I was coming into my master's, I remember talking with my advisor at the time, and he said that there was going to be 2 projects that we would probably be working on. It would be like, one was this one was this one, right? And so like I had an understanding of like, okay, I know the areas, but the actual what we were going to be doing, no clue whatsoever, right? Whereas then for my advisor, she was like, for my PhD advisor, she then was saying, hey, it just has to be in chocolate. That was what the funding was for because we were making a class that was on cacao and chocolate. Yeah, I could do pretty much anything that I wanted to do, but I had to be the one to come up with everything, right? And so, that's where we came up with the idea of the fermentation aspect because it relied on the microbiology that I had all learned in, masters and everything, and then trying to apply it from there. But it also got to a point where it was all on me. If I wanted to change something, I would confirm it with her, but it was all, it was my responsibility, it was my project, it was my research, it was my area, if that makes sense. So but I've been told, in certain universities and certain departments, you will do rotations. You might not even know who your own advisor is going to be for quite some time as well. This is not for our department again at UIUC for the food science thing, but there was people that they come in, I think they rotate every lab for like 3 or 4 months, if I remember correctly. Like they go through every month and then they do these rotations for like a semester, and then they'll pick somebody after that, and then vice versa. The advisor will pick somebody and hopefully it's a good match basically. I've heard people that they come into their and they know exactly what their project is going to be working on because it's a master's project and it's much, I would say, easier to be able to kind of plan out and work on versus like a PhD. I don't think I've ever seen a single person where they're told like what their PhD projects are going to be. I think it's that as it should be in my personal opinion is you have to kind of figure it out yourself because that's the best way to get trained and understand and learn it is to just struggle through it and try to do it and try to go through every aspect where you're just being kind of pushed in one direction or the other by your advisor basically. Yeah, I think that that's probably the best I can say for all of those.
No, it makes sense. I mean, I understand advisor now that I'm on the other side, I do see how the
Yeah.
advisor makes a difference. And
Mhm.
arguably that's make sure you like your advisor when you're signing up for it. Or
Yes,
I shouldn't say like, but you should have a
a good
personality that
relationship.
a relationship
Yeah.
and that your work complements each other because some
Yeah.
people really need the structure and all that. And
Hmm.
with my personal experience. So I entered in a master's program
Mm,
and I had a project preset. It was like, here, this is an exchange student had done this project. We want to publish it, replicate it, and then that's your
mm,
master's project.
okay.
Unfortunately, I was unable to replicate it. So over time, but during that process, I did transfer over to the PhD, and then it became, okay, well, now you're just in water-based, water and oil emulsions,
Mm,
stabilized by fat. That's your general area. Now let's start
mm,
making projects out of that. So that
okay.
transformed over time. So kind of
Sure.
to alluding like what you have, where it was like, this is where the funding is in this area.
Right.
But I have heard that um, different advisors are very hands-on, different ones have different ideas about how you talk and all that. So when it comes to so once you got into the post-COVID and you're working on your project, sorry, I have to backtrack. So
You're totally good.
your lab work, did you end up doing any of your lab work at Illinois? Yes, you did. You did. I was listening
No,
with the
you're
T.
good.
So you did some lab work at Illinois at your university with the T's and such. What did your structure of your day look like? Like what was that experience like for you?
Yeah, I think it depends a lot on what year of my PhD that
Okay.
everything was a little bit different. Like first year PhDs and or masters, you're typically coming in, you're reading some papers maybe, you're setting up groundwork, you're just trying to get used to the lab itself and like pipetting and streaking plates if that's your thing or whatever basic stuff that you're trying to do. Maybe you're just watching a postdoc or a PhD or somebody else in the matter that's doing their experiments and you're helping out so you can kind of learn the flow, right? Then you're going into classes and you're going to do classwork and schoolwork and all this other stuff. And if you're a TA, then you're prepping to, do your own, teach your own class and everything. And so, then it's like you get to your second year and your third years, typically that's when then you're going to be doing less class and more lab work. And then you're doing more so on your own, or you're doing more duties, you're having meetings with collaborators, or you're talking, you're going to this other building to use this one very specific machine or instrument that's only in this building, in this one kind of back alley room, basically. And you have to pick up in learning about that stuff, or you're reading more papers about how did this person do this thing, or what did they work on in this. And then you get to kind of your third and fourth year, and that's when you're really, finishing up data. That's when you're really trying to focus on, making sure that everything is aligned. You're doing your statistics, you're starting to write it up, you're putting your materials, your methods, all that other stuff together. For me, it was a little bit different in that, like I said, like if we ignore the 2 years of COVID and just kind of take that out and throw it away, then that's pretty much kind of what it was like. But I taught classes. I loved teaching classes. I also liked taking classes. I thought it was fun because, this is the time to learn something new and to take different areas, not just in food science personally. Like I took integrative biology classes. I took statistics classes. I took theater and art production classes. I took a ceramics class. I took a vegetable gardening class because why not, right?
That
Like,
is so cool.
but again, first off, I will say this is all based off your advisor and how much that they I would say put emphasis onto what the lab work needs to be done. My advisor was very much like, as long as your work is done, it doesn't really matter, right? But there are some advisors that they want to see you in the lab from 9 to 5 or whatever else matter. I had a different professor when I told them that I was taking a theater class, they were like, I would never let my student take a theater class. And I was like, okay, well, that's great. I'm not your student, but like, whatever. It's just, it's, again, it's very much, as we said before, it's so dependent on your advisor as to what their processes are. But I will always say, like, for you, you are your own person, no matter what it comes down to, as long as at the end of the day, you are doing your work, but you're able to gain a valuable skill by taking a Spanish class, or you're taking cooking 101 because you just have never had a chance to be able to do it. Go for it, because this is the time to do it. Because when you get out, you're now going to be at a 9 to 5 job, most likely, right? You're dependingly, I think it's the statistics are only like 10% of people go back into academia, into like postdoc and all that other professors and stuff. And so 90% of people, right, are going to go out into industry. They're going to go out into wherever. You're going to have a 9 to 5 job, if not, again, a little bit different. You're not going to have as much time for structured, really good classes in taking something at a university, right? Like, it's a little bit different. So this is the best time, I think personally, to do it, right? You have tuitions typically covered for if you have an RATA or, fellowship or something like that. So take a vegetable gardening class. It's a great way. I honestly cannot say much more to take a de-stressor from everything that relies in grad school. I had multiple people that took yoga or like fitness classes because they wanted a workout in the middle of the day just to stop thinking about science, 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 science the entire time. And so, take advantage of those things and find what works for you, and, have a conversation with your advisor, and hopefully it works out well.
And I think that you point out a good thing about how there's so many opportunities and just the flexibility that you can even do it in the middle of the day.
Oh
Once
yeah.
you get a typical job, you might have a lunch break, but
Yeah.
odds are you aren't going to have time to go shoot out and do a pottery class. It's
Right.
just not within your realm.
Nope. That's the weekend stuff now.
That is true, but I mean, some people do. I mean, it is nice though to have that structure once you start
Yes.
to work. When I did do a little bit of time in between my graduate school and undergrad, I did work for a year, and I did like the idea of when I went home, it was my time, and I did not
Yep.
have to try to squish something in between. So that was a nice aspect. But then again, being in grad school, the flexibility is nice that you can run out, and also having so many things on campus is such a nice
Oh
thing
yeah,
as well.
yeah. There's events, there's free food, there's networking things, there's, oh, your friends want to, meet up and make a Quidditch club. Sure, why not? Like there's, when else are you gonna be able to do it, right? Like, oh, you want to go to a gym and you'll see like 800 other students there that are all working out as well. Yeah, you'll probably find them there. There's a pool because there always is a pool, right? Like, or there's always good food. I will say that's the one thing I do miss about college towns, is that it's like everything, there's a certain, you just go on this strip and everything is going to be good, decent food, right? And for good prices. So you're not paying downtown prices anymore or something like that. Yeah, I do miss that part about college, honestly.
Unless you're like me, who my college town is a downtown, so
Oof,
I'm in
yeah.
Toronto, so I'm
Hmm.
like right in the heart of it. So
Yeah, it's a little bit different. It's a little bit different for that side.
yeah, I go to the grocery store. Food's expensive right now, just in general, but I digress. One of the things that you had mentioned was that you taught, so you did TA, you acted as a
Yes.
TA. So can you speak a little bit more about that? Like, what is being a TA, and like why did you have to do it?
I I loved teaching. I've always loved teaching. Like when I was in high school, and then when I went into community college in my undergraduate, I signed up as like a tutor or something like that, for to it's a good, after school job, and I luckily didn't have to work at like fast food or something like that. I'm saying this in the kindest way. But I worked at like Best Buy and stuff like that. So it was a good experience as a tutor, but it was always cool because you can see the way that people would light up when a thought or an idea finally made sense to them that they had been struggling with for so long, right? The lighting up their faces, or the way that students kind of interact, and everybody always comes at assignments in different ways, and it was never like you would never get the same assignment turned in every single time, right? I loved also just designing courses and, teaching and learning in that aspect of like making workshops or having it be fun, because, I would say the majority of the time when I was taking a lecture, you get to a point where their voice is the same, they're talking about boring concepts, they're not really engaging or interacting, and you're so tired and worn out from doing literally everything else in college. You need somebody that's going to be that pep in the step. You need something that's going to be different, somebody that's engaging. And I wanted to be that in my class. And so our class was called Food Systems, Cacao, and Chocolate. And what we focused on was trying to teach people food science concepts, but not at like a super in-depth level. We would go
Yeah.
into certain things, but we would try to basically say like, okay, let's talk about nutrition labels and what does it mean to say, this is one and this is an FDA approved label, or okay, this, why is it that this chocolate bar is not just all brown colors? Why is it that it's purple and white? We'll talk about marketing. We'll talk about end of life cycle. We'll talk about how our food process from bean to bar, like what does that mean, and what does it mean to when, let's talk about the bad sides of chocolate when it comes to child labor and slave labor. And let's talk about aspects that are going to be, okay, how do you read a label? Like when it says EDTA on there, like what does that mean? Or if it says TBHQ, like does that mean this that you have this scary, awful, poor and no, and I kid you not, there's always some students that would just be in there that were like, I don't want to have that chocolate. It has fillers in it. And I was like, you can't even tell me what a filler is. Like, let's be honest, right? Like if you knew what a filler was, you would tell me why it is in there and you would know why it's in there and not just like for reasons, right? And so we go over all of those things, like, like when it says, oh, this is for preservatives or freshness, like, why do we talk about those? Or GMO and non-organic, or this one is, pesticide free or something like that. So we teach people that, and we had majors from all over the place: computer science, architecture, actuarial sciences, statistics. We had art majors. Like it didn't matter necessarily. We only had 40 students, and as long as you signed up, like you could take the class, and you got to try a bunch of chocolate, which was always great too. It was typically from 1 to 3 o'clock, so you got your chocolate, and then you could go home and take an afternoon nap, basically. There was no tests, there was no quizzes, there was no, hard memorization things. It was 5 group assignments and 1 individual assignment that they had to do. And we would still get people that complained about that, and it's whatever, it is what it is. But I didn't want people to be sitting there writing down everything that I had in a lecture slide and, trying to memorize, some name from the 1500s that did this cool thing back then. That was not the important concept. I wanted them to learn, hey, this one says that it's a 72% cacao. What does that mean? This one says that it is, a vanilla bean extracted chocolate. What does that mean? Okay, this one says that it is raw chocolate. What does that mean? Right. And we wanted them to learn more about, they could take and go to a food product and go, oh, would you look at that? This one says it has no sodium added. And oh, cool. Like I know what this means, right? Or like, oh, like when I think of chocolate, I think more about the time and the effort and the energy that went into it. So I will not try to waste food as much comparatively, because there's somebody in this world that spent years cultivating this product right here. So I will try my best to not, throw it away needlessly or use it improperly and stuff like that. And so that was kind of the aspect behind the class. And I just love doing it. And it got to a point where the first year that we did it, it was me and 2 other professors. And then one professor went to another university. And so it was me and the other professor. And then, we hit COVID. And then after COVID, it just became, okay, this is basically my class. Like my advisor would show up, she would teach the first class, and then I taught everything else after that. And she was okay with that because she's a department head. She needed to go do the things that were much more important, honestly.
Mhm.
And so it was really great because it allowed me to develop really amazing speaking skills and also be able to improvise well with students, but also be able to handle responsibilities and, be able to be flexible but also stern at the same time, right? Just being able to learn how to handle like workshops and how to be able to answer questions, or knowing and saying, hey, I don't know this, I will look it up and I will correct it for the next time, or something like that, right? And just being able to, work with students is just, I think it's just such a fun time, honestly. They come up with some crazy stuff. There's always, again, there's students that they will, like, I had a student say, oh, I was sick on week 2. This is like the end of the year, right? The end of the like the last class. And they're like, I was sick on week 2, so I missed this assignment. Can I make it up? And it's like, no, you can't. Like if you told me the day of or like the week of that you're like, hey, I'm sick, like, can I make up the assignment later? I'd be like, yeah, sure, like whatever, that's fine. Just get in it at some point. You're telling me 2 days before your grade is due, like you want to make up this, no, I'm
Yeah.
not letting you make up this assignment. Like so it's just it's fun to handle with those situations,
It gives you a little bit of a laugh, but that is an amazing opportunity that you don't even think about when you're going into grad school. You think about you're going to do research and I'm
Right.
going to be learning and I'm going to be becoming a PhD and I'm going to be becoming an expert on a topic, but then you don't realize that there might be opportunities for more than just your research and to be able
Yeah.
to teach a class, that's amazing.
Yeah, I loved it. I thought it was such a fun aspect behind it, and everybody's a little bit different. I'm just very grateful that my advisor encouraged and promoted the idea of teaching because one, I mean, it was her class in the first place, so it allows
Mhm.
for my funding and everything, but also like there's some advisors that they don't want you to be a TA because it distracts or detracts from your
Which I
time.
get.
And I understand and I get that, but it builds like I was talking with my advisor recently after now graduating. I was sending her an email. She said that there has been a like a what's it called? Like a there's not enough TAs, basically. Like
Oh.
not enough people are signing up for it, even though there's plenty of students, because all of their advisors, or not all of the advisors, but a lot of the
Mhm.
advisors are saying, I don't want you to TA because that's going to distract you from doing your research or working on your thing. Like some of them are like, no, if you TA, like you were not going to be in this lab or you're not going to work on this project or something like that. And it's like it's hard to work with at that point because the whole point for grad school is to be able to try to do just like with any other school opportunity is to just go out there and have fun, figure out something, do your work and do your research at the same time, but gain new skills so that you're not just a one note person, right? Like nobody out there necessarily just wants somebody that it's like the only thing that you can do is listeria monocytogenes and nothing else, right? Like they want you to be able to do a variety of different
Yeah.
things as well. So,
And it's interesting that that's also the case when they want these are led by professors that do the research, but then
yeah.
you're asking a professor who's never taught to teach and
Yep.
with no support. It
Yeah.
sounds like a weird circumstance.
It's a weird circumstance. And again, it happens because, I think it also like personally, like I think there's like a 4-year cycle, if that makes sense. Like it's like you'll get some people that are really excited into TAing, and then as you get the most amount of TA, like you get then to a point where there's too many TAs, then it goes down, right? Because then they start recruiting people so that there's less people
Mhm.
that want to teach, and then you get not enough TAs, and then too many TAs. It kind of just I think it just cycles, through and through. But yeah.
I know with my school, we're actually required that we have to do one per semester,
Mm,
except in the summertime. So it's a part of our funding package that you have to
mm.
TA, and
Okay.
it can impact your stipend if you didn't actually take it. So
Sure.
different schools.
Again, I think everybody should at least try it at some point. I think
Agreed,
if you're going
agreed.
into grad school, like you'll realize, for your times when you were sitting there, like being like, "Oh, this TA is stupid, and this doesn't make any sense. This lecture is not." You'll see like what the difference is between
Yes,
one and the other. Like you'll have a little bit of an appreciation, I think, for it overall.
I definitely have a
Um,
big appreciation afterwards that I like. I'm actually TAing the course that I did back in my undergrad, and I'm seeing like what they did, and I was, oh, now I get why they acted the way they
mhm,
did or why they did
mhm.
this, and it's like, okay, I get it.
That was me in like trigonometry, I think. Like when I was doing a tutoring, like I during trig couldn't understand a dang thing. And then I get out of it and I have to teach it or teach like pre-calc. And I was like, oh my God, it all makes sense now. Like it all just it's just even by me teaching it, it like just connected together in some way that my brain just functioned around it.
I totally get that. And one thing I did want to ask during this conversation is you mentioned now you're at McCormick, and that transition between PhD and industry can be very difficult for a lot of individuals.
Yes.
Some people just struggle a lot. Did you find it was difficult for you to find a job? If you mind answering
No,
that
yeah.
question, but was it
Um,
difficult?
it was very difficult. I wanted to, because of how my timeline was looking, I knew that I was going to be finishing up in this past summer overall, and so I wanted to try to secure a position um somewhere before then, basically, right? Because I wanted to make sure, like, okay, do I have a chance to go and like visit the place so I can look at apartments and visit the city and maybe go interview in person or just something to that matter, right? And so from November of 2023 until like late February, I was applying to at least like 3 jobs a day. I think in total, I applied to 72 different jobs. And this is all with written cover letters, specialized resumes, like everything basically. I didn't copy, like, to be honest, not every single resume was, perfectly slated towards things, but there's things that I would change to emphasize or to switch around and make sure that it was kind of, this or that. And it was everything from laboratory manager to application scientist to, scientist, like I said before, principal scientist to senior scientist to R&D director or, something like that. Because again, like for an undergrad, in my personal opinion, it's very easy to know what your role is. You're either an associate scientist or an assistant scientist or potentially a scientist, depending on just the company itself. Like if you look at the this is what you're going to be doing or this is what your role entails, it's very kind of easy to understand that, right? Or like the requirements of a bachelor's degree, very simple and easy. But for a PhD and even for masters in some cases, again, as we said before, it's like you're this over here, but if you go over here, it's something different. But if you're here, it's something different. But if you're here, it's something different. And so I applied to like 72 different ones because I was not necessarily sure as to what I wanted to do, if that makes sense as well. Like I was happy with doing R&D or applications or science policy or being a manager of a laboratory or just at this point, it was just I wanted to get my foot into the business in general because while I appreciated the fact that I went from undergrad into master's into PhD, I didn't have time to do internships. My undergraduate university was not set up to get internships in the first place. They were not a really good science-based undergraduate university. And so it was really difficult to have those connections and relationships. And so, every single one of them is like, oh, like, what's your business? Or like, what's your experience? What's your work experience? And it's like grad school, grad school, grad school, grad school, tutoring, and Best Buy. Like, it's pretty much what I got, right? And so it was, it was very difficult. But what I was told, at least for this position, something that really stood out to them was I had a minor in theater and that I did improvisation and I did speech and debate in both high school and in college. And they really liked that because half of my responsibility, quote unquote, half of my responsibility is to work on this workshop class through McCormick called Flavor University. And so I will be taking over like a workshop situation where we go to different companies or different locations and we will host a class, quote unquote, called Flavor 101 or Flavor 201. And there's different ones that besides these, but the idea is to teach basically a like whole day long workshop to industry based people, somewhere between 30 to 50 overall. And it could be anything on flavor to spicy foods to they want to do a chocolate thing at some point, basically to, whatever that they basically want me to teach. But the person that I've been taking it over from has been doing it for like almost 20 years now, basically.
Wow.
And so he's like, I'm transitioning to a new role and new responsibilities. You're going to be the one taking that over. And so they cared about my minor, which I didn't think that anybody would, right? Like, not to be rude, but I was like, as a major in biochemistry, a minor in theater, and like I put it on there because like it's there. But that actually apparently was the thing that really stood out to them of saying, hey, he actually has public speaking experience, knowledgeable in improvisation, able to work on the fly, teaching experience because I did 4 years of teaching, the chocolate class plus also 2 for a microbiology class I worked with. And, I did lab and TAing in my undergraduate as well. And so they were like, this person has a lot of teaching and lab experience that would be great for what we're wanting, them to do basically. And so in like late February, they offered me to come up and do an interview. I did 3 different interviews. I did one with a marketing team because the marketing team is kind of the people in charge with helping with the Flavor University that I was talking about before. I did some with the research and innovation team, who then became kind of like my lead person that I'm now working under. And then I did a 45-minute presentation where I could present anything that I wanted to possible as long as it dealt with food science or flavor science or something like that. And then basically about 2 weeks later, I got the offer and I accepted like the day after because I was just so excited. So,
Congratulations.
thank you. Yeah, it was a great, like, it was a very awesome and amazing experience, but yeah, it was definitely a very much like a, went, from one thing straight into the other. And, I'm so appreciative to McCormick and to just everything that they've done for me, because they've really made me feel like a recruited person. Like, they make me feel very wanted, and everybody is super freaking kind and amazing there. But like, that was 1 out of 70. And I will say that, like, and this is not against McCormick at all. This is against like other companies. I received so many rejection letters that I'd wake up every single morning and have 3 rejection emails. And you don't ever know why, unfortunately. And that's always the most, awful thing. You don't know if it's because, okay, I'm applying for February, but I say I'm going to graduate in July. I'm not going to be ready to move or make the move until then. Maybe they need somebody sooner. Maybe they don't need somebody that says it, and maybe I'm too experienced for this position, or maybe I'm too under experienced for this position. And it's really difficult to kind of figure out those reasons why. So that's why the biggest thing that you can ever do, and I cannot recommend this enough, is networking. It didn't necessarily, unfortunately, work for me, but every single recruiter or talent acquisition or whatever that I've talked with thereafter was like, no, a lot of it is, they get hundreds of resumes because it's just, so quote unquote easy to apply today because of AI generation and everything else matter, that they'll get people that are from different, not even anywhere in food science, that still apply for the job because they can just click a couple buttons basically. And I know that's not ever to discourage or delimit, because I know how long it takes to apply to those things. Unfortunately, there's people out there that they kind of shortcut that. And so talent people have to look through every single one of those resumes and give about 5 seconds to each one. And if for some reason the resume just doesn't jump out to them for whatever reason, it's an immediate, off to that, right? Or they have their own AI as like the talent acquisition thing, where they're reading through,
Mhm.
and trying to look for keywords or experiences or dates or whatever else matter. And if their AI or their, machine or whatever else matter can't read it, it doesn't look good, it doesn't have the keywords or something stupid, unfortunately, in my personal opinion, it basically, really can make a very difficult experience for a person. I also had a chance, like, I applied in November. I didn't hear back until like, I think I got one in June. And I was like, this is yeah, like, it was like over 6 months. Because okay, so I kept an Excel sheet and I put a date and I said, this has been so many days since I have applied, or, had a communication
Mhm.
or something like that. And it was like, one was like, I think 185 days. It was like the longest that I got to. And I was like, what are we doing here? Right? Like, there's no point. Um, so it could be a very harrowing experience. It's not gonna, I'm not unfortunately trying to sugarcoat it. I wish I could. But the biggest thing I can say is just network and find a job that you think would be right for you, and find people on LinkedIn, message a manager, message somebody that in that whatever that position is that you're applying for, try to, look for that same position, but as a manager, or look for operations or VP or something like that, and try to connect over LinkedIn, or just try to send an email or get some sort of contact to be like, hey, just in case the portal over here didn't work, here's my resume, here's my thing, here's what, like, my experiences. I would love to be able to work with you, blah 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 blah. And just try the best that you can, and be specific, but also be kind, and just, don't be angry, don't be mad, but also don't like copy paste
No,
over and over again.
that's really good advice, AJ. And thank you for sharing that and just being honest. As much as I wish that I could say to everyone as well, like I do agree, network, it's always good, it'll help you. But
Yeah.
sometimes you just got to go through the hassle of one
Yep.
after
Yeah.
another, and
Yep.
just it's sometimes just the reality of it, sometimes the timing, it's nothing of it. But I just love what your background and the thing that you didn't think would make the difference. It was
Right.
just for like you personal. That could be the thing that makes you stand out. Like
Right.
and it goes to show that you're a whole person. There's more to you than just school. There's other
Right.
aspects, and that's the uniqueness that you bring to a position. That's going to be the thing that can allow you to excel. So hearing that and hearing about your journey, it's been good. And we're already at the end of our conversation. It kind of blew by, and there's a lot of more that I would have loved to ask you, but we are at the end. But thank you so much for coming on the show, AJ. I was going to ask you for another piece of advice, but you rounded off the episode without me even having to ask that. So I don't know.
Oopsies.
Maybe you can replan that. But I do actually have one other question, which is
Yes.
if people wanted to ask for advice or find you, where could we find you?
So feel free to email me. It is aj_taylor@mccormick.com. There's also LinkedIn. If you look up AJ Taylor and McCormick, I should be the first one that pops up on there. It's my nice shiny face. And I'm happy to help anybody out there if you ever have any questions, comments, concerns, or you just want to learn more about different experiences. Happy to do so.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the podcast. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with AJ and you gained some valuable insights into the world of grad school. And even if you're not looking to go into it, maybe you just learned about what that experience is like and you didn't really know. If you enjoyed this episode, then please leave a comment or review on anywhere you get this podcast because it really does help us out. As always, thank you everyone so much for listening and I will see you next time.